Hello everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Stud 3. Can't believe we're already into 3 of these. Really got some more great questions on this one, and thank you all for your support out there. Those people that have sent the questions, thank you very much. Questions are just amazing. They continue to be, and wow, I'm just real happy to have such knowledgeable fans out there. And this one is going to be, we'll probably go about an hour or so like we have on the other two. And I hope everybody's going to enjoy it. I have not seen the questions, but and I don't like to see the questions. I like to just get them and go from there. And so that's the way we're going to handle this one. Really don't know where all they're from, but I know that the first two that we've done have been kind of from all over the country, and a couple of them from outside the country. So looking forward to hearing where the questions are coming from. You know, it's that's always a little thrill for me. You know, and so I want to thank you all again, and I think we're ready to give her a roll. Let's take a shot at it and see what kind of questions we got for Ask the Stud 3.
Our first question comes from Wesley Rogers, Tellico Plains, Tennessee. Who do you consider your greatest opponent in southeastern Knoxville and the best angle to come out of the southeastern Knoxville area?
Wow, that's a good question. First thing I want to do, I think, really with this one is why confine it to Knoxville? Let's talk about. I got 3 names that just jump right into my head right away, and one of them's out of Knoxville, but the other 2, actually 2 of them right off the top of my head. So let's do that. Let's answer your question, Mr. Rogers. Tellico Plains, beautiful area there, pretty part of the country, right on the edge of the Smokies, and a beautiful place to live. So let's answer this with 3 guys rather than my favorite in just southeastern Knoxville. I guess my first favorite in southeastern Knoxville would have to be, man, undoubtedly the guy that was there when I went there, and I bought out John Kazana, and he'd been there for many years. Wow, what a talent he was, and I'd never seen anything like him. Well, I don't think a lot of other people around the country either had seen anything quite like Ron Wright. And I'd have to say he's probably one of my favorite to work with. And not only could he wrestle, but he was a tremendous on the microphone. Wow, he was really good. And he, unlike anybody that I've ever been around or ever seen in the business, kind of first time I ever saw him, I was in the Tampa dressing room with a lot of young guys and older guys as well. And right then, on that very first time I laid eyes on Ron Wright, this was 2 years before I ever went to Knoxville and started using him as a wrestler for me. He had everybody in that dressing room looking at each other and saying, "Who is that guy?" I mean, and he was always that way. He was "Who is that guy?" forever. My goodness, and fans. He was a fixture in Knoxville wrestling. Him and Whitey Caldwell had some tremendous matches, and Ron Wright and I, for the first 2 years, in 1974, 1975, 1976, I started out as a heel, and he started out, and I started him out as a babyface. And then I switched to babyface, and he switched to heel, and well, I was back and forth. But Ron Wright, I'd have to say, Mr. Rogers is definitely one of them. And there was a second one that popped right into my head too, and he was Knoxville also. He didn't come to Knoxville till about late 1975, early 1976. Wow, he freaked fans out there in that part of the country. I remember the day he showed up in his very first match. He had the fans running from him. They were horrified of him. And I'm talking about the Mongolian Stomper. and wow, wrestled the Stomper from 1975, 1976 on into the early 80s. Part of that time was in Pensacola after sold Knoxville. Then he came to Pensacola and stayed down there and was a huge star there. Did the same thing there, freaked people out. He was just a phenomenal talent, a great guy to wrestle against, and just wow. And everybody loved him. You know, if you knew him and you spent time with him, he didn't have an enemy in the world. Everybody loved Archie Goldie. Came from Canada. What a background. And we've got on the streaming channel so much stuff on Archie. We got a tremendous documentary. I watched the thing twice because it was almost all matches I had never seen before he came to me. And wow, he was just always a tremendous talent. So Mr. Rogers, I gotta say, Archie was the second most. And then the third guy, well, talk about great guys. There is no better guy, and there wasn't a better human being than Bob Armstrong. And Bob and I started being friends basically, actually in Florida in 1974, before I even left Florida. He was in the territory, and we became friends in 74. Then he came to work for me in 75, 76, 77. He never left. He just stayed with us. And what a great guy. And, you know, an old Marine, just a salt of the earth. And wow, we had such tremendous matches. And I started with him as a heel. When we went and opened up southeastern Gulf Coast down there. And then I turned babyface. 1982, there's some stuff on the streaming channel, and we've shown some of it on YouTube with where he turned heel against me. Then I turned heel against him. We had probably the longest running feud in wrestling history. And it was because he had four sons, and three of them ended up wrestling during that era for me and the company, and for Bob and the company. And it was me and Rob and Jimmy. It was the Welches against the Armstrongs. And wow, we went back and forth, heels to babyface, back and forth for many, many years. And so, well, that's a great question. You know, that really kind of starts us off good here, Wesley. You know, this is a good question. I gotta say, I got Ron Wright and the Mongolian Stomper and Bob Armstrong. And if that ain't three characters, man, of all time, I don't know who could be and who would be. But thank you very much for that question.
Our next question is from Edward Robinson, Evergreen, Alabama. For the Southern Division of Southeastern Championship Wrestling, Pensacola, Mobile, Dothan, who were the wrestlers that you brought to the territory who exceeded your expectations, and who were those who just didn't quite measure up?
Well, great question. Mr. Robinson, out of Evergreen, Alabama. Nice little town. I think we wrestled there a few times in the years we were down there in the Gulf Coast area. And so, well, there's a lot, man. That's really, really a tough one in a way, because there are so many that exceeded my expectations, man. And I honestly go, some of them just kind of jump out at me right away. Arn Anderson that showed up out of nowhere, a job boy on TV. He just kept coming back. He just kept improving. And then we gave him a shot. We brought him in to work full time. Wow. What do you say about Arn Anderson? I mean, I don't need to say much about Arn Anderson. Everybody knows what Arn did and what he went on to. The Four Horsemen. He did pretty much all of it. He was phenomenal. He had a partner down there in southeastern Gulf Coast that was just as talented as Arn, I thought. and Jerry Stubbs, Mr. Olympia. And when Jerry Stubbs became Mr. Olympia, he took a leap in his profession. He became a big star. Wow. Especially Mid-South. He went into Mid-South and tore him up over there. Just about wherever he worked as Mr. Olympia, he was always good. Actually, those guys both worked as Mr. Olympia before it's over. So, another one is Brad Armstrong. Brad Armstrong, Bob's son. He always had a great body, Brad, and what a great kid he was, man. He was so mannerly, and everything was yes sir and no sir, and I thought, wow, if he ever learns how to work as good as he looks, his career is going to be awesome. And by golly, he started from the very first night. I think the first match I ever watched Brad in, my mouth was hanging open half the match. Like, this kid is going to be phenomenal. And he was really, truly a masterful worker. Adrian Street. I'm going to throw Adrian in there because got that video from England and, took a look at it, and all those guys in the studio upstairs are watching it on the monitor, and these are just not really wrestling fans. They're guys that's doing TV, just recording the TV and working at the TV station. And they were all, wow, look at this guy, I saw him wrestle, and the first few wrestling moves I ever saw him make, I was sold right then, because he wasn't all gimmick. He could do it. He was really, really good, and he could shoot. He could do whatever needed to be done. And wow, he lit him up. I mean, he lit up fans throughout when we were still Southeastern, when it turned into Continental. Adrian was just phenomenal at what he did. There are some others here that I know I'm going to miss a whole lot here because there was so many of them. There was a team that came in for us that were small guys. Danny Davis and Kenny Wayne. And Danny Davis had been trained by my father on his farm, the Big Bend in Bolivar, Tennessee, back in 1976, 1977. Kenny Wayne's father was Dwayne Peel, wrestled as Dwayne Peel. And Kenny had a wrestling background, and both of them were small. And I knew they were small, but I saw them work in another territory. And I said, these boys look good, man. I don't care that they're not big. They do so much good stuff that, I said, I'm gonna give them a shot. And although I knew Mr. Robinson, I think the name was, I knew right away that I wanted them to be in my territory. Once they got in the ring and they started working this long program with Tommy Rich and Johnny Rich, and I mean, I was astounded at some of the matches they had. Those two guys, Danny Davis and Kenny Wayne, they were just phenomenal. Some of the bumps they took, and I saw them one time on a 20-foot ring slam somebody on the far side of the ring. One of them held the guy's legs down, and the other one took a flying jump off of there and landed on his rear end with his leg across the guy's throat, across a 20-foot ring. I had never seen anybody that could do that. And they covered that ring like it was 10 feet long, 10 feet square. So yeah, there's another great one, and God, there'd be so many more of them that I could think of if I really wanted to dwell on it. But let's talk about those that kind of disappointed me. One of them was a Canadian. And I'd had a lot of Canadian wrestlers that were great. Ronnie Garvin, Canadian. Joe LeDuc, Canadian. Louis Tillett, Canadian. guys that were really great came out of Canada. And I had heard so much about a guy named Vic Rain, who was out of that same part of the country that they were out of. I had a chance to get Vic Rain. It was probably I'd say maybe around 1984, somewhere in that time frame, that I had opportunity to get Vic Rain, and I brought him in to Southeastern, down in Pensacola in the Gulf Coast area. And by then we were in Birmingham, and we were pretty much in 4 or 5 states at that point. And Vic really just ended up disappointing me. He never turned out to be what I thought he was going to be, and I really felt bad that he couldn't get over. But he just didn't. He didn't know how to work for Southern people, I think is what it was. I mean, Ronnie Garvin figured it out quick. Joe LeDuc worked for anybody anywhere in the world. Some of those guys, so could Louis Tourette. So I would say Vic Rain was a disappointment to me, and we had another tag team came in when we first went into Birmingham, probably 1980 or so, that I had real hope for. They had 2 great workers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. Shawn Michaels goes on to be a huge WWE star. Marty Jannetty kind of panned out early, but those guys, I had an opportunity to get them. I said, geez, let's get them. Let's bring them in here, man. I think those guys can do it. They could both wrestle, and they had the looks and the talk. And for whatever reason, they really didn't get over like I had expected they would, and that was a disappointment to me. Obviously, it didn't hurt Shawn Michaels' career. He went on to become a huge star. And Marty Jannetty never got anywhere near where Shawn Michaels was able to get. But and there's always Mr. Robinson. It was a hard thing to do as an owner of a wrestling company and a booker to pick guys. And sometimes you were going to hit a winner, and sometimes you were going to get a loser. And great question though, and I hope I kind of explained it to you. And if I had a little more time, I probably could think of 10 more and on each side that was beyond my expectations and those that disappointed me. But a great question, Mr. Robinson. And I deal with you quite a lot, Mr. Robinson. I see you a lot on my social media, and you seem to be a fine gentleman, and I believe you may be a preacher. Possibility. You certainly are a very religious person, and I really appreciate having you as a fan.
Our next question comes from Dwayne Light, Knoxville, Tennessee. With indie wrestling growing in popularity, do you think that territory wrestling could make a comeback? I still feel if the right product was put on TV locally, it could succeed. There is nothing on anymore like a weekly local show. The problem with the local indies is you don't feel the bond you felt with the wrestlers back in the day because you aren't invested watching them every week on TV, just in my opinion.
Dwayne Light, is in Knoxville. I don't know if he sent us his name, and we're going to have quite a few people here that maybe didn't send the cities that they live in. I know Dwayne Light has been a huge wrestling fan, and I guess he was long before I came to Knoxville in 1974. He works for a great company they sponsored USA Wrestling in 1988, my last wrestling company. And Dwayne, he was at my dinner with the stud. In fact, he brought a lot of things from his company and gave them away to fans that night. So Dwayne, thank you very much for your question. And I get that question a lot, and not exactly in that form, but everybody wants to know, why don't it work, and why won't it ever work again? And that's kind of the basic question here. And so, let's start with the fact that, wrestling is not what it used to be. It's changed so dramatically. The sport itself has changed, and what guys do in the ring has changed so dramatically that And indie wrestling, I go to a lot of indie wrestling, quite a bit, more than, I'm going more and more than longer I'm back into wrestling, and which has been for about 5 years now. I've been back doing podcasts and things like that, and I see a lot of indie wrestling, and I'm also always disappointed at their crowds, the size of their crowds, and they probably deserve better than what they get as crowd wise. But when you talk about would TV make a big difference? And I gotta say, I really think the problem is not the TV and it's not the exposure. The problem is that the business has changed so dramatically, that the sport has changed so dramatically. If you wanted to compete, you'd have to have a national television program rather than a local program, I believe. You can only run a small little area off of one television station. So if you're really serious about trying to compete and become big and grow to where you get big crowds of any size, you'd probably have to have a bigger TV. And it's a really, really difficult situation. It's not a kayfabe world anymore. Let's just get down to the nitty gritty. Back in the day, people didn't know. And when they didn't know, they believed. And once Dummy in New York decided, I'm going to save a little money and just out the professional wrestling business. I don't care if it kills it. I want to save a little money on these athletic commissions all around the country I'm having to pay. And it's not real, it's a show. And when that came out of his mouth, he destroyed the wrestling business as we had all known it. And I don't think it will ever recover. And he, asked me, I think something about, if what could bring it back. And I don't know how anything could bring it back, because the, cat's out of the bag. It's and fans are just having a difficult time accepting the fact that what they watch out there isn't real. And wow, I got to be honest with you, in a lot of the indie stuff, I do the same thing. I watch it and I go, oh my God, that's horrible. It's just horrible. It's hard for me to watch it, but I understand where you're coming from, Dwayne. And I don't blame you. Wow, I would love to be able to be the one that could step up and say, I'm going to take it, I'm going to give it another shot, and let's see if we can get Knoxville's Coliseum to selling out again. That would be a goal, a first goal. Let's see if we can get a sellout in a big building somewhere. But I just don't think at this point that it's going to happen anymore. You've got these big national companies, and they have some great looking wrestlers, and they do some tremendous flips and flops and flies. But wow, they know nothing about wrestling, and they don't do any wrestling, and you can't hardly build wrestling without wrestling. And if you don't have wrestlers that know how to wrestle, they'll never be able to build the business, because it needs to go back to its very roots and back to the beginning, and you start shooting MMA style. You take your wrestlers and you teach them how to shoot and how to get holds that are going to hurt somebody and make a guy give up, and maybe you attack it from that range, that way, and then you get yourself on a national television, and you might be able to bring it back. But I think short of having shoot wrestling, I don't know if it ever happened. And great question, though, Dwayne, and thank you for your support, sir. You've been a tremendous wrestling fan, as long as I've been and around since 1974 in the Knoxville area. There's probably no better fan.
Our next question is from Johnny Morgan. I would like to hear your thoughts on the potential sale of WWE and what effects it would have on the wrestling world in general. Along those lines, which direction do you see wrestling going, and would you like it to go more MMA style or sometime in the future?
It's a little bit in that same realm of what we just answered with Dwayne Light. Johnny, I gotta go back to the same things. As far as WWE's sale, gosh almighty, I mean, it has become such a monstrous company. I heard a rumor that who could afford to buy it, right? Would be a good question. And I heard a rumor somewhere not too long ago that maybe the Saudis in Saudi Arabia would be interested, and they might be interested in buying WWE. If that happens, then Johnny, what would that do? I think it changes sport tremendously. I think in that part of the world, they have a lot of great wrestlers there, shoot wrestlers. And I don't know how much they would change WWE style, but I know they would change some for sure if the Saudis get control of American wrestling. Basically, that's what the WWE is. It's today's American wrestling. And if the Saudis get control of that, I think they're going to add some legitimacy back to it in some ways. They're going to stick on there a bunch of guys from that part of the world that look like wrestlers, and they are wrestlers. A lot of them are really wrestlers. They can wrestle. And so it would be interesting if the Saudis bought it. In my estimation, I think it would probably be a very interesting thing. Beyond that, I don't know. This is it kind of goes back to what we're talking about in the last question I got. It's still the fact that it's a kayfabe world, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them to come over here and try to switch the business back around. Basically, I think, in my opinion, Johnny, I wouldn't mind seeing the Saudis get their hands on professional wrestling because I believe they'd have about as good a chance as anybody to maybe turn the business around a little bit. When you go to other countries, in which I have been in many, many countries and worked with wrestlers from those countries, and it's good for you. You go to Japan, it's stiff. When you go to other parts of the world, I mean, you run into all different types of wrestling and wrestlers, but I think what's here now is going in the wrong direction. And what we need in this country with our professional wrestling is legitimacy, and we need something real. And I believe those people in that part of the world might just be the people to bring that real back. And if that were to happen, they're going to be very, very successful in this country. And so we'll just see. And great question, though. And I've given that a little thought myself about who would be good to who might make this happen. And if it goes that way and the Saudis end up buying WWE, I say, look out. Let's see what the heck's going to happen then.
The next question is from Landon Bauer, Vancouver, Canada. Love your studcast. In 1979, when you were having so many problems, how difficult was it making the decision to sell your Knoxville territory? And did you have any idea you would ever be coming back?
Wow. Another great question. Beautiful city, Vancouver, Canada. Wow, it's just a phenomenally beautiful place. One of the prettiest places I've ever been, and beautiful. What was his last name? Landon Power, I believe it was. Whatever his, Landon, Knoxville, having to sell Knoxville. Yeah. It's kind of like losing your child, you know, somebody in your family dying, you know. It was in 1974, I go there as a young man, and I'm all gung-ho, and I find out, man, I have stepped into something that I was not ready for. And I barely made a go of it in 75. I didn't make a go of it in 75. It hadn't been for Jerry Jarrett giving me a spot on top in Memphis and paying me really good. I wouldn't have made it at Knoxville. It would have never turned out to be a success. 76, it finally turned around. 77, it got better. 78, it got better. 79, it was doing pretty good, and then we had a real problem. I was in a position, you know, Landon, where I really had no choice. I felt I had no choice. The people that were running against me were running a really, really horrible type of competition. It was just terrible what they were doing, and it was killing Knoxville. I had been and wrestled in for the NWA in the Atlanta War in 1972, 73. And that war, both organizations, they did business straight up, did the best they could against each other, but they did not make nasty remarks and do things to hurt the business. And the guys that I was dealing with that were trying to be and run their own company, they hurt the business. They hurt Knoxville big time. And yeah, it was difficult. And it was extremely difficult making a decision. But about the middle of the summer of 1979, I could see the writing on the wall. And Knoxville was going down and down and down. What they were doing was just terrible. It was just going to get worse. I could see that it was going to get worse, and it continued to get worse. So about 3 months later than the first time it hit me that you need to sell this, I had a buyer. And I was able to leave there, and wow, it hurt me for a long time. It was very, very difficult. And when I left there, Landon, I had no idea that I was ever going to be able to come back to Knoxville and wrestle there again. And what happened is the territory had been hurt so badly that even great guys, great wrestlers, you had Blackjack Mulligan and Ric Flair, and you had the Georgia territory guys came in there. They couldn't draw any money in Flair and Flanagan, and Blackjack couldn't draw any money. Finally, it died. It totally died to where there was no wrestling in Knoxville, except for this little small-time guy that Terry Landell, that thought he was a wrestling promoter, and he ran in these small towns, and he ran in parking lots, of Walmart parking lots for free, and he'd draw 300 people, and he thought that was big success. And so I never dreamed that, you know, Ron, you're going to be able to go back there again someday. And then, well, we turned Southeastern. We went from doing studio wrestling into a major building. We put Gordon Soley on the stage there, and we turned Continental on fire. And then we started moving and expanding. We were in 85, 86, a time when Vince McMahon was eating up NWA people, and he wasn't eating us up. You know, we were doing really good, and all of a sudden, wow, out of nowhere, I sat down with the guys in the company, and I said, guys, I think we need to go back to Knoxville. And we had an opportunity to get on TV there again. We put our TV in there. We waited 3 months, and Knoxville had been dead for 5 years. Everybody that I knew that was in the business said, Ron, what are you doing going to Knoxville? Nobody draws anything in Knoxville anymore. And I said, well, we'll find out. So And so we went back in 1985 to Knoxville. We all went back. We took everybody that they had fallen in love with there. Bob Armstrong went, and I went, and Rob went, Jimmy went, the Stomper was there. It was just we just brought everybody that they'd ever seen. And in that first night, it was unbelievable. I went to that old black curtain in the back of that building, and I pulled that son of a gun back, and it was sold out to the rooftop. I mean, it was like we had come home. In fact, that was a year, I believe 1985 was the 100th year or whatever of the state of Tennessee. And you had these signs every time you came across the border into Tennessee. It said, welcome to the Tennessee Homecoming. And that's what we called that event, the Tennessee Homecoming. And wow, it turned out to be just that. And we just went. It was like we never left. It was just every time we went there, that Coliseum was sold out. We were able to go into Chattanooga, where we'd never been. We sold their building out. We were just red hot, all the way to Ohio, from the Gulf Coast to Ohio, wherever we went, we had a full building. It was a tremendous time for us, and what a great thrill to go back to Knoxville after the way I had to leave. And amazing thing, great question, really appreciate it. I know you're living in a beautiful place. I kind of envy you, but I got a pretty place I live now too, by golly. Ain't much better than the Smoky Mountains anywhere on the planet that I'm aware of, God's country. And thank you very much, Landon, for your question.
Our next question comes from Michael West. Was the demise of the Southern NWA territories a given, or could the promotions have stayed in business and withstood the Titan Sports WWF onslaught? What could they have done to keep their territories?
Wow, good question, sir. I guess a lot of people have asked that question as well. I've heard that, something similar to that before, obviously, many times. I think what had happened is things had changed so much, and what really happened is wrestling promoters were, there was a National Wrestling Alliance. It was a group of promoters. They all were part of everything, and they were doing the same thing, all promoting wrestling and doing it in their own way. And but there wasn't a lot of cooperation between the promoters. And wrestling promoters were always just very independent. I mean, you had to be kind of half out of your mind to want to run a wrestling company anyway, and so they were all very independent guys, and they did not feel like they needed help. And there were many years, for 50 or 60 years, in which they didn't need any help. If you had a good territory and you had good wrestlers and you had a good booker and your publicity was right and you were on good TV stations, you were going to be successful. You were going to do good. And they didn't need to cooperate. And when McMahon came along, and with his WWE and his whole concept of let's take them one at a time and kill them individually, basically. And let's steal their talent. Let's take their top guys, bring them into our company, put those top guys on our TV. And that's a crucial part of it. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But they take your top guys and then they put them on their TV. And then they bring them right back into your territory and put them against you. And it worked very well for them. And so I think the problem with the Southern promoters was the problem with all of the promoters, with all the NWA promoters, is the fact that they didn't cooperate. They couldn't work with one another. They had spent their entire careers individually operating their companies. And, how do we divide things? We're going to all get together. We're going to run the South together. There's 7 of us, and we're all promoters. Who's going to get what? And, how are we going to pay each other? And it just was not going to work. and it didn't work. Obviously, it didn't happen. And part of the problem was, and the biggest part of the problem was the TV, the national television. And once Vince got the national TV, then he had the whole country. It was just a matter of time until he was going to be able to take everybody down. And he was very patient about it. And within about 2 years, or 3 years at the most, he took pretty much everybody down. And I think he had a question about how could you do it again? And you could do it again, I believe. If you did it again, you'd have to have TV. You'd have to have national television. You'd have to have just the same TV as his. Obviously, we've kind of talked about this in some of these questions earlier. You'd have to have, you change the style of the wrestling show. It wouldn't be too hard actually to compete with WWE. And I hate to say that for fans out there, because it's not a good product. I mean, it's not spontaneous like the old wrestling used to be. It's all written up by writers, and the writers never wrestled in a single match. They don't know anything about wrestling. They don't know anything about what wrestlers would say. And everything is laid out before you go to the ring. You've got to 4-minute to 3-minute spiel. You word to word, you memorize it, and you do it. Wow. It was never like that in the old days. You could turn Ron right on to 4 minutes and he would burn the house down and have everybody at home wanting to choke him in 4 minutes. And nowadays you watch what goes on now, and you got heels out there that they take that 4 minutes and you're asleep after 2 of it. You don't care anymore. And so it's a bad thing, and I really wish things hadn't turned out the way they did. But I don't see things changing very much unless maybe the Saudis come along. Maybe the Saudis come along, and they're pretty intelligent people, and they might be able to make it happen again. But it'd be a totally different product. It ain't gonna be the same as it was, that's for sure. And they'll have great TV stations if they try it. And it's too bad. I just don't think Southern wrestling is ever going to come back. I don't think much of any of wrestling like the old style is going to come back. And I just don't think that there's much future for us. But that's a great question, sir. And glad you answered. You asked it, and I really appreciate your support, and thanks for your question.
Our next question comes from Tom Doss. What was it like being a member of the NWA Board of Directors with a little in-depth knowledge of what went on behind the scenes, voting on different matters while you were promoting and wrestling in your own territory?
It's a good question, Tom. A lot of people have questions about the NWA, how it all worked and everything. And I was a member since 1975. I became a member of the National Wrestling Alliance. It was first year in business there in Southeastern, in Knoxville. And in 1985, I was elected as vice president of the NWA, which was quite an honor. It wasn't as many guys there in the NWA at that point. Some of them had started to fade away in the early to 80s to the mid 80s for sure. And it was an honor, sir, Tom. But at the same time, it was kind of sad. I remember going to those meetings in its heyday, the NWA. Wow, you had to have a room that would hold as many as 50 promoters. It was a big, big thing. And, it had shrunk down dramatically. And I didn't have a whole lot of jobs. and responsibility, even though I was vice president. But I did get to see some of the inner workings of it. And, I got to deal with some people that were great old timers. A lot of older guys that I was older than me at that point, and I started promoting about as young as anybody ever had. So, I was still a pretty young guy in '85. And it's quite an honor, and it was a great organization. It probably only had about basically 2 more years left, if that. I don't remember. It might have been in August of '85. We used to meet every year in Las Vegas. In August of '85, I think maybe '86 might have been the last meeting ever of the National Wrestling Alliance Promoters. And it started in 1948 when my grandfather was one of the founders. And I believe the first meeting in 1948 had seven promoters in it. 1980, early in the 1980s, it was probably 50. And it wasn't just America. It was Australia and Japan and New Zealand, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Canada. It was the world. Basically, it was just about the world. Was in that. Everybody was in that business, wanted to be in that organization, and wow, it was a wonderful time, Tom. It was a great experience, and it was quite an honor in '85 to be elected as vice president. And I wish we were still there. Gosh, man, I wish right now we were still going out there every August and meeting in a big hotel somewhere and talking about how to make our fans happy around the world.
Our next question is from Bobby Bodden in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. I watched you wrestle on my island and listened to your studcasts. After your retirement from the ring and a successful run in hockey, how difficult was it starting a dealership with the ADT Home Protection Company?
Wow. You done your homework, Bobby. And I love it down there in the Caymans. Wow, what a beautiful place, man. Wow, I used to take my crews down there. We used to wrestle down there back in '82, '83, '84. Twice a year, we'd go down to the Cayman Islands and take a couple of days and run a show down there. Wow, it's a great place. Great people down there. Love that. Love those islands. Beautiful place. Yeah, Bobby. I guess after I got out of wrestling, I stayed. I took a summer off, and then. I hadn't worked everything since 1970 when I first started wrestling, and I'd been through 4 years in Florida as a wrestler, and then I was 14 years as a promoter, and wrestling had all died away, and it didn't look like to me it was coming back, and I was lucky to get into hockey and had some tremendous success in hockey. Was in it for 5 years and decided, I wanted to quit and retire. And I did. And I went to the Keys. Wow. I'd been to college down there in University of Miami. I always said, someday I'm going to live down here. I'm going to have myself a boat. And I'm going to enjoy life when I retire. And I ended up in the Keys for about 3 years. And then I wrote a book. Wow! I wrote Brutus in the basement of my home. It took me about 2 years to do that, and then I was looking for something else. I guess I wasn't meant for retirement, so I found out about ADT, and I found out that you could get a dealership without having to buy it, that they were looking to expand, and they wanted businessmen to run offices, open up companies and run offices for them, in conjunction with them, basically. And I went to a Hilton Hotel in Tampa, Florida, met a young lady there, and we had an hour and a half conversation, and she asked me about what I'd done in my life, and and she was kind of like, by the end of it, like, wow, I mean, hey, you've done a whole lot of things, different things. And I said, yeah, and I believe I can do something with ADT, and it was a great time. It was right after 9/11, and timing is everything. Wow, I had a strange career. I got into hockey, and I remember my buddies and we bought our first franchise for $25,000. And 2 months later, Wayne Gretzky got traded to the Los Angeles team. And I told my partners, I said, guys, this is going to light up hockey. It's going to make hockey huge in America. And they were like, what do you mean? Are you serious, Ron? You really think so? I said, let's see what happens. And by golly, it did. And then I just got in it. It was perfect timing. We got in it, and boom, Rick Gretzky goes to LA Kings, and the business explodes. I go 9/11. This was about less than a year after 9/11, and ADT, security. And wow, that was the biggest word in America at that point. We'd just seen something horrible happen to us. Everybody wanted security. I mean, all the way down to their houses. And I said, I think this is a great time to be in this business. Wow, had a great run, had a really great run. And ADT, in the real business world, I call it. I mean, I'd been in sports businesses, and wow, when you got into ADT, you were in the real business world. There were, 700 dealers in North America, and we were really lucky. I had some great people working with me. And we grew. We ended up numbered the 12th largest in North America out of 700 dealers. So we had some good success. I had some good success in ADT, and I never regret it. That's for sure. And after that, I retired again for a few more years this last time. But now I'm back doing studcasts and answering questions from fans, and I'm kind of back at work again, and I guess that's the way I'm going to be probably the rest of my life. I might take another year somewhere, but I'll probably find something after that. But great question. I appreciate it very much. And Tom, thank you for asking it, and thanks for your support.
Our next question is from Anthony Gillot. So who can we blame for Hogan? In my view, he ruined pro wrestling and hurt the boys. I could be wrong, of course.
Well, that's a great question there, Anthony. I certainly don't want to take the blame for Hogan, but actually, having been the guy that discovered Hulk Hogan, I have good thoughts about Hogan, and wow, did he go on to become a monster star? There's no doubt about that. I don't think, to be honest with you, Anthony, that Hulk, it was Hulk's fault. What happened to Hulk and what happened to wrestling. If you think about it, Hulk was just a wrestler. He was doing what he was told. I think the blame, if anybody has the blame for Hogan, it should be Vince McMahon Jr., because he's the one that made Hulk into what Hulk became. The first time I ever wrestled Hulk, I was pretty much amazed that how little he knew, and that wasn't his fault. He trained in Tampa. They trained him a little bit in Tampa, and then they decided that that he's not going to be good. He's not going to make it, and Hiro Matsuda broke his leg on purpose, try to get him to quit, not come back. But he ended up coming back, and then Louis Toledo was booking for me down there in southeastern Gulf Coast, 1979. It's a horrible time frame that we're in right now in all these studcasts. he discovers Hulk Hogan, brings him into Dothan, Alabama, and down there in the Pensacola area, and I go and wrestle him, one of his first matches there. And wow, I was like, geez, I don't know, but gosh, he had something. He had charisma. Dusty used to call it charisma. I got charisma, Daddy. Well, he had charisma. Charisma, actually, is what the word is, but Dusty shortened it up a little bit. And he had great success. I don't think he had anything to do with where wrestling went, though. I just think he was just one of the boys, and he got in the wrong hands, and the guy that got him in his hands made him a whole lot of money and made himself a whole lot of money. So, it kind of depends on how you look at it and what seat you're sitting in. Was Hulk Hogan meant to be a big star, or was it a bad thing to make a big star out of Hulk Hogan? But either way, history is what it is, and it will always be that way. Wrestling, it's had its ups and downs, and now it's certainly not what it used to be, and it may never be again. But I don't blame Hulk. And if anybody's to blame for what happened with Hulk, I put that blame on Vince McMahon Jr.
Our next question comes from Tate Fugate. Where was Eddie Graham originally from, and where do you rank his mind for the business among all other promoters and bookers?
Oh, wow. Jace Tate, you picked one of my favorite, one of my absolute favorite guys in the wrestling business, and that's a great question. Eddie Graham's real name was Gossett, is the last name. He was Eddie Gossett. And he was born in, of all places, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, how he made his way out of Chattanooga and got into the wrestling business, I don't think he ever wrestled that I'm aware of for my grandfather and Nick Goulas in Nashville or even in Tennessee. The first time I think Eddie Graham became a star was in New York for Vince Sr. Wow, he was a huge star there. As the Grahams, him and Luke and the Graham family. And so he took that Graham name. Eddie Graham was he was one of the finest human beings that ever lived, in my opinion. One of the most intelligent. He was where does he rank in business mind so far as the business? Wow, he's up here. He's way up there at the top. When I first started wrestling in the Florida territory, in which he had established and made it a big monster territory, long before I went down there. My grandfather used to wrestle in the Florida territories in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Go down there sometimes in the winter. Roy would go down, Herb would go with him, and they would wrestle tag matches and, Florida. But then when Eddie got hold of the Florida territory, he made a monster of it. He made it I think the best territory in the country or in the world during this time frame of say 70 to 85. They turned Dusty babyface. Wow, everything Eddie did exploded the territory. He was so respected in Tampa. He'd been there for many, many years. And he did so many things for the community. He didn't brag about it, but the papers would write great articles on him because he didn't want the publicity of people knowing that he was behind the boys' club. The boys' ranch up there in the northern part of Florida. That was Eddie Graham's deal. I mean, he put those kids that had no homes and He just did so many things for the state of Florida and things that he didn't want people to even know about. He was such a wonderful guy and so smart about the business. I remember the first finish that I ever heard Eddie give, and I was in a 6-man tag with him. I'd been in the Florida territory for only about 3 weeks. I was very green. I'd only been wrestling for 6 months. And it was me and Eddie and somebody else in the 6-man tag. And he started telling us the finish. We're all sitting there, and he said he's going over the finish. And the finish went on and on and on, and it was like, I'd never heard a finish like that. I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember I must have been looking lost. And so one of the guys gave me a little nod like this, and he goes, like, well, I'll help you out here when it gets finished. It was probably took him 3 minutes to tell us what the finish was. And so the guy took me off to the side, and he says, yeah, you're green, ain't you? And I go, yeah. I've only been wrestling 6 months. And he goes, you first Eddie finish? Yeah. I know. What in that? How do I remember that? I don't. And the guy must have took 30 minutes with me, and he sat there and he went over it and over it and over it and over it and over it. I learned so much from Eddie Graham. In that time frame, 1970 to 1974, I got to be so good. I tried to become the same type of booker he was and the same type of brain he had, and I tried to develop these finishes that were just awesome, just tremendous. Leave fans, they don't know what's going to happen in the very end of it. You lose them halfway through, and you get them back, and you lose them, and you get them back. It's like, and so they started putting me into St. Louis in 1973 and 74, and I thought that they and word was that might have been trying to get me ready to take over the NWA belt after Briscoe in that time frame, somewhere in that time frame. And anyway, Pat O'Connor, former world heavyweight champion, was the booker there. And he found out one night, he says, Ron, would you like to figure your finish in your match? I said, sure, I'll figure a finish for you, Pat. And he goes, yeah, okay. And Pat watched the match, and it just blew the people away. It was like, in St. Louis was always, 10, 12, 14, 15,000 people in the building, and that building just exploded. And he came to me, and he says, Ron, my gosh, he goes, so the next time I go, when I was going every other Friday night, he said, Ron, would you like to figure the second match finish? And I said, yeah, I'll do that for you, Pat. Boom, boom, man, it would explode both of them, first and the second one. And it wasn't but about a month, and he said, Ron, how about you figure all of them tonight? And so it was kind of taking advantage of me, but Pat was learning something too, man. He'd never seen finishes like this, and so and that, I think, has so much to do with my success. That's such a big part of booking, is not just having the right guys, but having the right type of match. It's what happens on the end of those matches that's so critical to the business. And so, wow, that's a tremendous question. I'm glad I get a question about Eddie Graham. I have so much respect for Eddie Graham. And and I don't want to end it this way, but it is the end for that deal. That deal is he has such a horrible legacy in his family. His father committed suicide. Eddie committed suicide, and then his son, Mike Graham, committed suicide. 3 generations of suicide. I could never figure that out. Eddie had so much to live for. He had a beautiful home. He had an airplane. He had a wonderful life, And but wow, I owe. When I think back, I owe as much to Eddie as I do my own father for what I learned about the wrestling business and the success I had in it. And thank you for that question very much, Anthony. He was a special human being. Thank everybody here. I've really enjoyed this. I love these shows. My goodness, man. I have more fun than anybody out there watching, I think. I really, really like doing these shows. And we had some great questions again today. It's truly amazing how knowledgeable the fans out there that watch what we do are. And wow, this one was a lot of fun. And we're going to do one. The next one is going to be in April. Normally it's the third Saturday in the month. We're going to do the fourth Saturday in the month because April has 5 Saturdays in it. So the next one is going to be on Saturday, April the 22nd. Be looking for my post on social media sites, my Facebook pages, the Ron Fuller Welch, the Ron Fuller Tennessee Stud, the Ron Fuller Welch author page. Be looking for it on Twitter at Ron Fuller Welch. You'll see me talking about, probably thanking people for listening to this one, and hope they've enjoyed it, and at the same time asking you to leave your questions there. I noticed that a lot of people haven't sent their home, where they live, the city and the state that they live in, and I think I like to hear it. I appreciate, and I haven't asked for it. I think I forgot to ask for it. That's why we didn't get many of them in this particular Ask the Stud, but maybe in the next one. If you're going to leave a question, leave me where you live, so I can kind of acknowledge that. I like to talk about I've been so many places in the world, and it's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to sit here and do what I do. And I really, really thank everybody. Saturday, April 22nd, join us for Ask the Stud number 4. And thank you all for your support as always. And I hope you enjoyed this one.